In the 1930s, Adolf Hitler seemed unstoppable. Newsreels showed a powerful leader. He shouted at giant crowds, promised a great future for Germany, and commanded a mighty army. He was presented as a strong genius who never made mistakes. This was the image the Nazi propaganda machine created for the world to see. But by 1945, that powerful man was gone. The reality was hidden deep underground. Below the city of Berlin, in a concrete bunker, lived a very different Hitler. This bunker was his last headquarters. The air was damp and stuffy. The walls shook from the constant explosion of Soviet bombs above. The only sounds were the hum of generators and the worried whispers of his staff. This was not the leader people remembered. The man in the bunker was frail and sick. He walked with a stoop and a slow shuffle. His left hand trembled uncontrollably. His face was pale and tired. The fiery, confident speaker was now a broken figure, trapped in his own collapsing world. His poor health was a carefully guarded secret. The German people were still being told to fight for victory. They were told their Führer was leading them. If they saw the weak, shaking man in the bunker, their hope would have vanished. So he stayed hidden. The bunker became a stage, hiding the truth about its most important actor. The strong leader was a myth. The real man was sick, tired, and falling apart. But his failing body was just the first secret. Deeper and darker truths were hidden in that bunker, waiting to be revealed. The man in the bunker was not just sick. He was being kept going by a dangerous mix of medicines. His personal doctor, Theodor Morell, was always by his side. Morell was a strange man, but Hitler trusted him completely. While the war raged on, Dr. Morell gave Hitler several injections, every single day. He also gave him many different colored pills. Hitler called these his vitamin shots. But they were much more than that. The injections were full of strong drugs. They included stimulants, which gave him a burst of false energy. This helped him seem alert during important military meetings. But when the drugs wore off, he would crash. Then, Morell would give him sedatives to calm him down or help him sleep. It was a dangerous cycle. Over time, Hitler's body became dependent on this chemical cocktail. The vitamins were actually powerful substances like cocaine and opioids. The cocaine was initially prescribed for his throat, but its use continued. The opioids were for various pains. This was another big secret. The German people saw their leader as a clean-living man who didn't even smoke. They did not know he was relying on a secret drug habit to function. The drugs affected his mind. In his final years, he made wild and irrational military decisions. Some of these choices may have been influenced by the drugs pumping through his body. The man making fateful decisions for millions was not always thinking clearly. The strong, controlled leader was a myth. The truth was a man who was physically falling apart and chemically dependent, hidden away in his underground bunker. To the German people, their leader, Adolf Hitler, was a mysterious figure. Nazi propaganda showed him as a man who had no time for a family or a personal life. He was portrayed as someone who worked day and night, sacrificing everything for Germany. The public believed he was married only to his country. But this was one of the biggest lies of the Third Reich. For more than 14 years, there was a woman constantly by Hitler's side. Her name was Eva Braun. She was a young woman from Munich who enjoyed sports, photography, and going to the movies. She was cheerful and lively, a complete contrast to the serious and angry image of Hitler. Yet, to the outside world, she was invisible. The Nazi propaganda machine, led by Joseph Goebbels, worked hard to keep her a secret. She was never seen with Hitler at big rallies or political meetings. Her name was never mentioned in newspapers. When important guests visited, she was hidden away like a ghost. Eva spent most of her time at Hitler's private home, the Berghof, in the Bavarian mountains. She lived a lonely life, waiting for Hitler to visit between his political and military duties. She was his secret companion, a part of his life that did not fit the perfect image the Nazis wanted to show the world. Why was she such a big secret? The Nazis had built Hitler up as a superhuman leader, a lonely hero who only cared about Germany. Having a girlfriend made him seem like an ordinary man. It would have broken the spell for many of his followers. So, Eva Braun remained in the shadows, a secret the regime kept from its own people. In the final desperate days of the war, Eva made a choice. She left the safety of the mountains and traveled to Berlin to join Hitler in his underground bunker. She knew the city was surrounded by the Soviet army and that death was near, but she wanted to be with him until the end. Then, in the early morning of April 29th, 1945, with the sound of Soviet bombs exploding above them, another secret was created. In a small, sad ceremony inside the bunker, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun were married. The war was lost, and they knew they had only hours left to live. The German people, who were still being told to fight for victory, knew nothing about this. They did not know their Führer had a wife. They did not know that while soldiers and civilians were dying for him, their leader was spending his final hours with a woman they had never seen, in a secret wedding deep underground. As the end drew near in April 1945, Adolf Hitler was filled with rage. He sat in his underground bunker, staring at maps of a country that was being destroyed. Germany was losing the war. His grand dreams had failed. And in his anger, he made a terrible decision. He decided that if Germany could not win the war, then it did not deserve to survive. He issued a secret command that became known as the Nero Decree. It was named after a Roman emperor who was said to have played music while his city burned. The order was simple: destroy everything. German soldiers were commanded to blow up all the important parts of Germany's own country. This included factories, power plants, bridges, railway lines, and communication centers. The goal was to leave nothing useful for the enemy armies that were closing in. He wanted to turn Germany into a barren wasteland. This was perhaps his most shocking secret plan. He was willing to sacrifice his own people completely. He believed the German population had proven itself weak by losing the war, and he felt they deserved to be punished. But this terrible order was never fully carried out. Hitler's own minister for weapons and production, Albert Speer, understood that this would mean the total end of the German nation. Speer secretly disobeyed the Führer. He traveled around Germany, telling generals and factory managers to ignore the Nero Decree. He worked to save the country's infrastructure, knowing it would be needed for the people to survive after the war. Meanwhile, back in the bunker, Hitler was making his final personal preparations. On April 30th, 1945, he said goodbye to the few staff members who remained. Then he and his new wife, Eva, went into his private room. A single gunshot was heard. When his aides entered the room, they found Hitler dead from a gunshot to the head. Eva Braun was also dead, from biting into a cyanide poison capsule. Their bodies were then carried up into the garden of the Chancellery, placed in a bomb crater, doused with gasoline, and set on fire. This was the final secret act. The mighty Führer, who had commanded millions, was gone. His body was burned in a hurried and messy way to prevent it from being captured by the enemy. The man who had wanted to create a 1,000-year empire had lasted only 12 years, and his end was not glorious. It was a hidden, desperate act in a ruined garden, marking the final collapse of his terrible reign. For days after the fires in the garden went out, the world did not know what had happened to Adolf Hitler. The Soviet army had taken control of Berlin, but the bunker was a silent mystery. Then, the truth began to emerge, piece by piece. Soviet soldiers were the first to search the bunker. They found empty rooms and scattered papers. But their most important discovery was outside. In a shallow bomb crater, they found 2 charred bodies. The remains were badly burned, but they were clearly a man and a woman. The Soviets secretly took the bodies away for examination. Their best doctors performed an autopsy. The evidence was clear. One body had a piece of skull missing, with clear signs of a gunshot wound. The other body showed no physical injuries, suggesting poison. The man's dental records were checked. They matched Hitler's exactly. The world slowly learned the shocking truth. The mighty Führer had not died fighting for his country, as many had expected. He had killed himself. He had not shared the fate of his people, but had chosen his own end deep underground. This was the final collapse of the Nazi myth. The propaganda image of a fearless leader was a lie. The real Hitler had been a man who, in the end, could not face the consequences of his actions. He left his soldiers and citizens to suffer while he escaped. The Soviet leader Joseph Stalin kept the details of Hitler's death a secret for a while. He let people wonder if Hitler had escaped. This confusion created many wild stories and conspiracy theories that would last for decades. But the soldiers and doctors who were there knew the truth. The man who had terrified the world was dead, his body burned in a hurried and undignified way. The discovery in the bunker did more than just confirm a death. It revealed the complete failure of a terrible idea. The strong, godlike leader shown in posters and films was a fantasy. The reality was a broken man, hiding in a hole in the ground, surrounded by the ruins of his own madness. The war in Europe was finally over, and so was the terrible story of Adolf Hitler. While the world was learning about Hitler's death in his Berlin bunker, Allied soldiers were making discoveries across Germany that would reveal an even darker secret. As American, British, and Soviet troops moved forward, they began to find places that the Nazis had tried to hide. These were not military bases. They were camps. The first soldiers to reach these camps saw things that they could never forget. They found thousands of people who were little more than skeletons, barely alive. They saw dead bodies piled high. They saw gas chambers designed to look like showers, and giant ovens used to burn human remains. This was the Holocaust. It was Hitler's biggest and most terrible secret. For years, the Nazi regime had been systematically capturing and killing millions of people. They targeted Jewish people most of all, but also Roma people, disabled individuals, political opponents, and many others. The Nazis built a massive system of death camps and concentration camps, all hidden from the German public and the world. When Allied soldiers liberated camps like Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, and Auschwitz, they brought cameras. For the first time, the world saw the true horror of what had been happening. Newspapers and newsreels showed the terrible images to a shocked global audience. The full scale of the crime was almost impossible to understand. The question everyone asked was, how could this happen? How could so many people not know? The truth was that the Nazis had worked hard to keep the Holocaust secret. The camps were mostly built in occupied Poland, away from Germany's major cities. The language they used hid the truth. They spoke of resettlement and special treatment, not murder. Most Germans knew that Jewish people had disappeared, but they did not know the terrible details of the mass killings. Hitler's own role in this was another secret he took to his grave. While he was the clear leader who made the hatred of Jewish people official policy, historians have never found a direct written order from him for the Holocaust. He kept his involvement vague, allowing others to carry out the details. The discovery of the camps revealed the ultimate truth about the Nazi regime. It was not just a political movement that started a war. It was a system built on mass murder. The man in the bunker, with his trembling hands and secret drugs, was responsible for the deaths of millions of innocent people. His final days of weakness and suicide stood in stark contrast to the organized industrial killing that he had set in motion. When the Soviet soldiers first entered the dark, quiet bunker, they found a scene of strange calm. The war still raged in the streets above, but downstairs, the heart of the Nazi regime had simply stopped beating. Empty chairs sat at desks scattered with papers. Half-finished cups of tea stood cold. It was a ghost town, buried under concrete. The soldiers moved carefully through the rooms. They did not know what they would find. They had heard stories that Hitler might be dead, but they had no proof. Their mission was to find the truth. In a small sitting room, they found the first clue. On a sofa lay the bodies of Josef and Magda Goebbels. They had poisoned their 6 children before taking their own lives. This grim discovery showed the soldiers that the Nazi leaders were choosing death over surrender. But the biggest question remained: where was Hitler? The answer came from outside. In the garden of the Chancellery, soldiers noticed a patch of freshly turned earth near a large bomb crater. When they investigated, they made a horrifying discovery. Buried just beneath the surface were 2 charred bodies, one of a man and one of a woman. The soldiers immediately suspected these might be Hitler and his new wife, but the bodies were so badly burned that identification was difficult. The Soviets decided to conduct a secret investigation. They wanted to be absolutely sure before telling the world what they had found. A team of doctors examined the remains. They worked carefully, knowing the importance of their task. The man's body showed clear signs of a gunshot wound to the head. The woman's body contained traces of glass from a broken poison capsule. These findings matched the stories told by bunker survivors about how Hitler and Eva Braun had died. The most important evidence came from a dentist. The Soviet investigators found Hitler's dental records. His teeth had very distinct features, including unusual bridgework and crowns. When they compared these records to the dead man's teeth, they matched perfectly. There was no doubt anymore. The man who had terrorized Europe was dead. But the Soviet leader, Joseph Stalin, made a surprising decision. He chose to keep this information secret. He let people around the world wonder what had happened to Hitler. This secrecy would create conspiracy theories that lasted for many years. But for the soldiers and doctors who had been there, the truth was clear. The hunt was over. Even though the Soviet doctors had confirmed Hitler's death, the world would not know the full truth for many years. Joseph Stalin, the Soviet leader, decided to keep the discovery a secret. He wanted to use the mystery for his own advantage. For months after the war ended, the Soviet government would not give a clear answer about what happened to Hitler. They would sometimes say he was dead, and other times suggest he might have escaped. This confusion was deliberate. Why would Stalin do this? There were several reasons. First, by suggesting Hitler might still be alive, he could keep other countries worried about a possible Nazi return. Second, the uncertainty made it easier for Soviet intelligence agents to operate in other countries while searching for Hitler. Finally, it helped Stalin control the story of the war, making the Soviet Union's victory seem even more important. Meanwhile, the physical evidence of Hitler's death, his remains, began a strange journey. The Soviets secretly moved the burned bodies from Berlin to a new location. They were buried and dug up multiple times as they were transferred between different Soviet military bases. Only a few high-ranking officers knew where they were. In 1946, the Soviets finally allowed a small group of reporters to see some of the evidence. They showed them dental records and parts of a skull. But they still didn't show the actual bodies, and many people around the world remained suspicious. The truth might have stayed hidden forever if not for the fall of the Soviet Union decades later. When the Soviet government collapsed in 1991, many secret files became available to historians. Russian authorities finally admitted they had kept parts of Hitler's remains in their archives all those years. In 2000, the Russians took what they said were Hitler's jawbone and part of his skull from their secret storage and buried them in a quiet ceremony. But even this didn't end the mystery completely. Later tests would raise new questions about the skull fragment. The long secrecy about Hitler's death had lasting effects. It allowed conspiracy theories to grow and flourish. For over 50 years, books and films suggested Hitler might have escaped to South America or elsewhere. The Soviet decision to hide the truth had created a legend that outlived the man himself. proving that some secrets can continue to shape history long after they should have been revealed. When the full truth about Hitler's final days finally came out, it completely shattered the image that Nazi propaganda had created. For 12 years, they had shown Hitler as a superhuman leader, strong, brilliant, and dedicated only to Germany. The reality was the exact opposite. The man in the bunker was sick, not superhuman. His hands shook so badly he could barely sign documents. He walked with a slow shuffle and needed help moving around. The powerful speaker who had commanded attention was gone, replaced by a tired, broken man who could only rage about his coming defeat. He was not clear-minded, but dependent on dangerous drugs. His personal doctor gave him daily injections that included stimulants and other powerful substances. These drugs gave him bursts of energy, but left him exhausted afterward. The man making final decisions about the war was not thinking clearly because of the chemicals in his system. He was not alone, but hiding his relationship. While German families were being torn apart by the war, Hitler had kept his relationship with Eva Braun secret for 14 years. In the bunker, he married her, while thousands of his citizens were dying in the burning city above them. He was not brave, but chose suicide. Instead of facing the consequences of his actions, he shot himself, while his new wife took poison. Then, his body was burned in the garden to avoid capture. This was not the heroic end Nazi propaganda had promised. He was not caring, but willing to destroy his own people. His Nero Decree ordered the destruction of Germany's food, roads, and factories, everything civilians needed to survive. He believed that if Germany couldn't win, it didn't deserve to exist. The discoveries in the concentration camps showed the ultimate result of his leadership. The organized mass murder of millions revealed the true nature of the regime he built. When all these secrets came together, they painted a very different picture from the Nazi myth. The strong leader was weak, the clear thinker was drugged, the lonely hero had a secret wife, the brave warrior killed himself. The caring leader wanted to punish his people. These revelations mattered because they showed that the Nazi government was built on lies. The powerful image that had convinced millions of Germans to follow Hitler was fake. Understanding this helps explain how such a terrible regime could come to power, and serves as a warning about believing in seemingly perfect leaders without questioning the reality behind their image. The story of Hitler's final days teaches us that the truth eventually comes out, no matter how well it's hidden. And sometimes, the truth can destroy a myth completely. The story of Hitler's final days did not end when his body was burned in that Berlin garden. The secrets that came out of the bunker continued to shape the world for decades after the war ended. They changed how historians understood the Nazi regime, and they left important lessons for future generations. First, the discovery of Hitler's true physical and mental condition helped explain some of Germany's strange military decisions at the end of the war. Historians now understand that the man making critical decisions in 1944 and 1945 was not thinking clearly. His trembling hands, his drug addiction, and his isolation in the bunker all affected his judgment. This doesn't excuse the terrible crimes committed under his command, but it helps us understand how the war ended the way it did. The revelation of the Holocaust transformed how the world thinks about human rights. Before World War II, many countries were reluctant to get involved in another nation's internal affairs. But the discovery of the death camps showed that sometimes the world cannot look away. This led directly to new international laws and organizations designed to prevent such horrors from happening again. The United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights both emerged from the lessons learned about Hitler's regime. The long secrecy about Hitler's death also taught valuable lessons about truth and information. The Soviet decision to hide what they knew allowed conspiracy theories to grow and flourish. This shows how important it is for governments to be honest with their people. especially about historical events. When the truth is hidden, false stories can take root and distort our understanding of what really happened. Perhaps the most important lesson comes from comparing the Hitler of Nazi propaganda with the real Hitler revealed in the bunker. The strong, confident leader was actually a sick, drug-dependent man. The powerful military commander chose suicide rather than face defeat. The man who preached about creating a perfect society was actually destroying his own country. This teaches us to be careful about believing in seemingly perfect leaders. The image presented to the public is not always the reality. The story of Hitler's final days shows us the danger of trusting leaders who cannot be questioned, who hide their weaknesses, and who demand absolute loyalty without earning it through honesty and good leadership. 75 years later, the secrets from that Berlin bunker still matter. They remind us that the truth will eventually come out, no matter how well it's hidden. They show us why we need to question power and demand transparency from our leaders. And they stand as a permanent warning about what can happen when a society believes in a perfect leader instead of looking honestly at the real person behind the image. For many years after World War II, pieces of Hitler's story continued to emerge. Each new discovery helped complete the picture of what really happened in those final days. The secrets from the bunker took decades to fully uncover. In 2009, American scientists got permission to examine a piece of skull that the Russians said was Hitler's. This was the same bone fragment the Soviets had kept secret for so long. The scientists did a DNA test, and the results were surprising. The test suggested the skull fragment actually belonged to a woman, not Hitler. This discovery created new questions. Did Hitler's body completely burn in the garden? Did the Soviets make a mistake when they collected the remains? Or was this just another piece of the confusing puzzle? Despite this mystery, most historians agree that Hitler did die in the bunker. The dental records match perfectly. The eyewitness accounts from staff members all tell the same story. The physical evidence and the witness stories all point to the same conclusion. The journey of Hitler's remains finally ended in 1970. The Soviets, who still had the bodies in secret storage, decided to destroy them completely. They burned the remains and scattered the ashes in a river. They did this because they didn't want any location to become a gathering place for people who still admired Hitler. Today, historians have a complete picture of Hitler's final days. We know about his sickness, his drug use, his secret marriage, and his suicide. We understand his plan to destroy Germany and the full horror of the Holocaust. All the main secrets have been revealed. The story matters because it shows us how dangerous it can be when one person has too much power. It teaches us to question leaders who seem too perfect. It reminds us that the truth will eventually come out, no matter how hard someone tries to hide it. The empty space where Hitler's bunker once stood is now a quiet parking lot in Berlin. There's no monument there. The German people have chosen to remember the victims of his regime rather than the man himself. The secrets are all out now, and the world can learn from them to build a better future. The story of Hitler's final days shows us that no leader is as perfect as they may appear, and no secret can stay hidden forever. The truth always finds its way into the light. The story of Adolf Hitler's final days is now complete. All the secrets have been uncovered. The trembling hands, the secret drugs, the hidden wife, the suicide in the bunker. These truths have replaced the lies of Nazi propaganda. We now know the real story of how the most feared man in Europe met his end. Looking back, we can see how each piece of the puzzle fits together. Hitler's physical and mental collapse explains why Germany's war effort became so disorganized at the end. His drug use helps us understand his irrational decisions. His secret marriage shows he was an ordinary man, not the superhuman leader he pretended to be. His suicide proves he was not the brave hero he claimed to be. The discovery of the Holocaust revealed the ultimate truth about his regime. It was not just a government that started a war. It was a system built on mass murder. The camps showed the world where Hitler's ideas ultimately led. The long secrecy about his death taught us another important lesson. When governments hide the truth, conspiracy theories grow. The Soviet decision to keep Hitler's death secret for so long allowed false stories to spread around the world. This reminds us why transparency and honesty matter in history. Today, the site of Hitler's bunker in Berlin is deliberately unmarked. There is no statue, no memorial, not even a sign. It's just a quiet parking lot beside an apartment building. Germany has chosen to remember the victims of Nazism rather than the man who caused their suffering. This sends a powerful message about what really matters. The story of Hitler's final days continues to be important because it teaches us to question powerful leaders. It shows us that no person is as perfect as they may appear. It reminds us that the truth will eventually come out no matter how hard someone tries to hide it. Most importantly, Hitler's story serves as a warning for future generations. It shows how dangerous it can be when one person has too much power. It demonstrates how lies and propaganda can mislead millions of people. And it proves that even the most powerful dictators eventually fall. The secrets from the bunker are all revealed now. The myth has been replaced by facts. The strong leader was actually weak. The brilliant strategist was actually a drug-dependent man making poor decisions. The lonely hero actually had a wife. The story is complete, and the world can learn from it forever. We study this history not to remember Hitler, but to understand how such terrible things can happen and to make sure they never happen again. The end of his story gives us the knowledge we need to build a better future.